The title is Towards a More Financial Literate Society, with a subtitle. I'm not going to read it. Is this an important perspective, an important goal in terms of what we were discussing before, to go towards a more financial literacy society, or is just something that is being discussed with useless words, and maybe it's something that is evoking useless policies, because it is true that the question is being very much discussed and that the policies are being promoted elsewhere. I hope to convince you that the issue is important, that not taking it seriously can provoke serious damage, and so that we can consider providing people with financial literacy is something like in the past, where people were simply illiterate, they could not write, they could not read, and having a basic in writing and reading was considered an important social goal. Today, we consider that having something of financial literacy is a part of our life. So I start with the macroeconomic background very quickly, because we have already seen, first of all, changing the demography. Larry mentioned this. Again, here I should perhaps apologize, because I was thinking when selecting the transparencies and so the data, mainly of Europe and maybe the US. But coming here, I had a feeling of a very different society, much younger, more dynamic, while if you are in Europe, you have the physical feeling of what aging is, because whenever you go, you see more elderly people than young people, while here is not the same thing. So changing demography means a lower fertility rate and lower mortality rates, particularly at elderly ages, old age. So it means, for example, if you look at Japan and Italy, we are now here, it means a doubling of the dependency, old age dependency ratio. And it means a huge problem to our society. So this, I believe, is a real problem, and not just a convention that we have to solve. Second, there is, of course, lower growth. This has been true in Europe, maybe also in the US, maybe not in China, but although they are growing fastly, they are also getting older. There is higher unemployment. I go very quickly because this is not the core of my presentation. And there is financial crisis. All this makes the background. And the question is, how do we provide, what are our provisions for the aging population? Are we doing the right choices, or are we shaping the right institutions, or are we making mistakes? Mind you that this is a question where you have necessarily to take a long-run perspective. You can't face this problem with day-by-day policies. This is certainly a mistake, although many governments tend to do this. Okay, so with respect to this, we have a question. And the question is how define and how do we measure retirement saving adequacy? What is an adequate provision? This question was posed by the European Science Foundation, and we participated in a research project dealing exactly with this. So we have a paper that came out of this research dealing exactly with adequacy. And adequacy means taking at least two perspectives. One is microeconomic, is the individual. Do we have adequate preparation? Do we have people behaving adequately? And the second one is macroeconomic. Do we have adequate provisions as society? Those two topics are to be somehow merged. So let's start with the individual dimension. And I just want to remind you that adequacy is not a concept that is common in economic analysis. Economists prefer to talk about optimality, rational models, where you optimize, where you maximize your objective, of course, subject to constraints, but you are rational and you only want the best, okay? So when we said, what is the individual perspective to look at the adequacy issue? And we found this definition, which is very demanding, which is provided by Engen and others. A household is said to be saving adequately if it is accumulated enough wealth to be able to smooth its marginal utility of consumption over time in accordance with the optimizing model of consumption. I don't know whether you are familiar with the model. The model is Franco-Modigliani, but also the permanent income hypothesis. This is the life cycle hypothesis. And the model says, okay, people work when they are young. Here, they earn an income, earnings, this is earnings. Then they retire, and they get a pension. And the ratio of this pension to this income is called the replacement ratio. So this is somehow, if you discount it, so you calculate the present value of all this, you have life cycle resources, and it is, let's say, the duty of the rational individual to distribute all these resources in life cycle in the consumption profile. And you see what smoothness means, in the sense that consumption is much smoother than income, okay? There is a resulting profile, which is wealth. It means that in this period, typically, the individuals save, so their wealth increase, is positive and increase. In this period, the individual consume more than their earnings, than their pension. So this is the period of the accumulation. So what is adequate behavior? Is being able to do like this, to consider that this is your life cycle resources, and you are a smart person, and you distribute this. So you don't just follow your income profile, but you save in this period to consume in this period. There is a lot behind this model, and we will talk about it later. But this is the individual dimension, and is very demanding on individuals. So the question is, are individuals prepared to do this? If the real life was like the model, maybe the individual would be able to do like the model suggests. But the real life is much more complicated, so people may have difficulties in following their life cycle. There is also a macroeconomic dimension to the adequacy problem. And this is something I already suggested before in our panel discussion, and it is what is the good, if not the optimal, design for pension provision, for retirement provisions. And here, behind these things, there is a lot of research saying that we have moved from a concept of pension provisions that were of the kind that Larry was describing before. I tax you, you are the young, I take the money and I pay them, and this is a tax transfer mechanism. We want to say there is more than this. There is insurance. And the insurance, what is insurance? It is redistribution of risk. So you have to be careful in, let's say, defining your taxonomy of risk and in trying to see whether you are distributing those risks at the highest level, okay? So we know now, this can be rather clumsy to you, but we know now that a good pension system has to have intergenerational, but also intragenerational risk sharing, which means that there has to be an intergenerational contract, which normally means the pay-as-you-go financing. This, again, Larry was talking about before. I made you pay taxes, payroll taxes, but we could also call it mandatory savings for your retirement. You pay me, I am the pension agency. I use this money to pay directly Javier his pension or Larry's pension. Okay? Why do you pay? Why do you participate in this contract? Because you believe that when you will be of your age, there will be another, what's your name?
More.
Another more here in your place, and he will pay. Pardon? Pay more, okay. More, pay more. So another more that will pay more for you, okay? And you know, and you trust me, and I am the state, that somehow I can make this intergenerational contract stable. It will be satisfied also in the future. This is quite important, and this is something that the market cannot achieve because the market does not allow intergenerational contract. So there has to be an appropriate balance between mandatory and voluntary savings, because we know that people are not so smart as we think. There is to be a mixed system, I have already said. The efficient pension formula, this again is important. I write here of the DC type. What is DC? Is defined contribution. We should be skeptical of a pension formula by which the state, the pension agency, tell us your pension will be, for example, 80% of your last income. How can the state guarantee 80%? This is defined benefit. How can the state guarantee a defined benefit far in the future? Well, because the state can tax. So we say can tax the young generation, but I want to know ex ante what are the terms of the contract. So if you say my pension will depend on my contribution, DC, and the age at which I retire, this I can understand, okay? So there is much more transparency in this. But anyway, the message of this rather complicated, and I'm sorry for this, I try to be very little technical, but it is a technical issue. Anyway, the idea behind this is that we should look at a pension system not just as a tax and transfer mechanism, but as a distribution, allocating of risk device. So if it has a good distribution of risk, we can accept and we can think it is sustainable. If it is not, then its bases are rather shaky. What I want to say is this. Based on those knowledge, the knowledge about the pension system, Europe has made a lot of pension reforms. Every country has reformed in the past 15, 20 years with different pace, more or less by adopting the perspective that I was describing before in every European country and not only in Europe. And what is the essence of these pension reforms? Well, it's quite clear. In the future, there will be less guarantees for retirement income. The passage from DB, defined benefit, towards DC, defined contribution, no guarantee. And there will be a lot more of personal responsibility. Okay? So this is the future, everywhere. You have to count on your contribution, and you will have many more choices than my own generation have had in the past with respect to retirement provisions. Okay? So this is quite important, a change, and this raises questions, in particular about people's response to this policy change in terms of savings, in terms of participation to the pension funds provisions that are quite new. For example, in Italy, we only had a social security system with no private supplement, and now we have a private component, a private supplement to public pensions, and people are not mandated to participate. They can choose. How will they choose? We don't really know. We don't have a basis to understand people's behavior. And moreover, we ask about people preparedness for retirement. This is very important because this is somehow saying that what we have done up to now is to count on an overestimated Homo economicus. Okay, so our model, Larry was saying this before, our model is based on rationality. Rational people have expectations. They behave according to the optimizing model, considering those rational expectations, and they understand the things of life. They understand not only the basic, but they understand how to solve a dynamic problem, a dynamic optimization problem. Is this true? Unfortunately not. And here it comes all kind of anomalies that have been found by what we call experimental economics, a body of research that has much increased recently, that has not provided up to now a general theory. There is no general theory that has come out of this body of evidence, but the evidence is there that what we call anomalies. Why do we call anomalies? Of course, with respect to our model, but it can be just normal that people have overconfidence, lack of self-control, mental accounting, dynamically inconsistent time preferences, and so and so. And so maybe the individual we have is just different from the Homo economicus that is at the basis of our model. This is relatively new. I know that, let's say, neoclassical economists look with skepticism to this experimental economics, but it is an overwhelming evidence now that something is different from our model. We have a more complex life cycle. because the certainty of the past have been changed dramatically, and we know that people have difficulties in facing those complexity. So we have, in particular, pieces of evidence that show that people lack planning, which is exactly the opposite of what we were suggesting in the permanent income hypothesis, in the life cycle hypothesis. So people have a short-run horizon instead of long-run perspective. People lack information about major components of a saving plan. They have little idea of what is risk. You mentioned before Mervyn King. I read recently a very nice, Mervyn King is the governor of the Bank of England, and I read a very nice lecture about the importance of giving people a flavor of what risk is in everyday life. Maybe I'm speaking in the wrong country with respect to risk. I mean, you may have a feeling, a different feeling from, let's say, European society that have been used to welfare programs for decades and decades, but risk is a dimension that people are not so familiar. They tend to think that the state has to provide every kind of guarantee, and even lack of financial advice, because you would say, okay, but I am a doctor, I am a lawyer, I don't need to know about finance, I don't need to know about risk except health risk, because I go to a financial analyst or to a financial advisor, they are exactly on purpose. But we also know that people, maybe they ask their friends, they ask their relatives, they see what people in their neighborhood do and do the same instead of going to the financial advisors, which can be the right thing to do, considering what financial advisors have provided in terms of advice. So let's say that there is this new kind of sport, which is, you know what, 401k, those are the pension plans in the US, and it's not like solving your life cycle model in a very smooth way, but it's like a very difficult, more than difficult, than the 10 kilometers race. It's becoming an obstacle race. Okay, so let's go to one dimension of this preparedness concept, and that is financial literacy. Again, I'm referring here to a research that we have conducted, particularly with Anna Maria Lusardi, and the research has been financed by NetSpar, and it was directed at measuring financial literacy across many different countries, and the output of the research will be published soon, I mean before the end of the year, by the Journal of Pension Economics and Finance, and it is a cross-country comparison. So financial literacy is an issue that emerged with respect to US. They are always at the extreme. First, they consider that their individuals know everything, and then they discover the individuals know nothing, so there is the problem. In Europe, the issue of financial literacy has come later, and governments are becoming to be involved in the issue, but we are still at a very initial phase. So what is financial literacy? Here we talked before about definitions. You challenged the fact that we have the same definition of policy. And of course, when we talk about financial literacy, what do we mean? How much do we ask from a person to know in terms of literacy. Of course, there is no uniform and not universally accepted definition. The question is just financial knowledge, or it's also capability? From knowledge to capability, there is a step further. Knowledge is one thing. Being capable of using the knowledge to make the right choices is a different thing. And then behavior. Capability is one thing. Behavior, effective choice, is still another one. So if we take this very authoritative, demanding definition, I will read because it's really very demanding, is the ability to use knowledge and skills to manage financial resources effectively for a lifetime of financial well-being. What is there left? Well, it's very demanding.
Description of God.
Well, maybe. So it's really very, very general and maybe too much. So in our research, we preferred something less. So we said, okay, how do we measure financial literacy? And let's try a measure. Much of this is due to Anna Maria Lusardi, a friend of mine who is in the US, but collaborates, well, she is one of our research institute also. So we said measures should be simple, relevant, concise, and able to discriminate, okay? And I will show you the questions, tests that have been devised and that try to respond to those features that we put and we required for a measurement. And is this, the three, they are quite powerful questions. The first is, suppose you had, well, $100 in a saving account and the interest rate was 2% per year. After 5 years, how much do you think you would have in the account if you left the money to grow? More than 102, exactly 102, less than. And here are the answers. So you offer the answers as a menu, okay? What is this question meant to capture? Whether knowledge, you're right, but of what? Compound interest. Do people have an idea of the mechanism of compound interest? So the question seems very easy, but the concept behind compound interest is not. Okay? Second question. Second question, imagine the interest rate on your saving account was 1% per year and inflation was 2% per year. After 1 year, would you be able to buy more than exactly the same as or less than today with the money in this account? So again, you have three answers, you are offered three answers. And what is this question supposed to capture? Here is, well, the effect of inflation. So it's nominal versus real returns. Are people capable of distinguishing between nominal and real interest rate, or they are not? Again, very simple concept, very simple question, an intriguing concept. The third one is the following. Do you think that the following statement is true or false? Buying a single company stock usually provides a safer return than a stock mutual fund. Again, what is here? Risk diversification. Do people have an idea of risk diversification or not? So you might think that these questions are too easy. Oh, what an easy test to pass. Want to see the results? You want? the results are not really encouraging. Let's see, for example, performance around the world. You see that in green you have don't know, refuse, which we interpreted as don't know, meaning ignorance, incorrect, and correct. What do you see is that across country there is a large dispersion of results. And that Germany is, well, is performing well. What is disturbing here, what disturbed them very much is Sweden. Because you normally think that the Swedish people are very smart, but perhaps they are sitting on a very nice welfare state, so they are not really compelled to learn. Italy is not really surprising. You are not surprised about Italy. Of course, the Dutch people are always the smartest in the class. The United States is there. This is for the interest question. Russia, we had a lot of problems with Russia, of course, and it is an attempt to include in the group, but of course there are many more problems in trying to measure. New Zealand and Japan. So let's see the other, because the time is running. This is for the inflation question, and one clear result is that people that have experienced inflation know. So you learn by living. If you have gone through an inflationary period, you know what inflation is. If you haven't, it's just an abstract concept. But again, you have many countries where there is 1/3 of people that don't know the answer, and less than 2/3 that make the correct answer. And as for the risk diversification, this is the question. First of all, we didn't have exactly the same question across countries, while the other two are exactly the same. This was a bit different. For example, in Italy, we had a different question, also in the New Zealand, because this comes from central bank surveys. But anyway, you see Russia. They have no idea, apparently, of what diversification of risk is. Italy performs at the same level for the three. Here, United States perform a bit worse than for the other, and even the Dutch. So apparently this is the more difficult concept among the three. There are general results that, for example, a typical age pattern. Age pattern means that the young and the elderly are the less financial literate. So the percentage of correct answers among these groups is lower. So it's an inverted U. If you are a middle-aged person, you probably are in the right age to do for your family, and so you have more practice, okay? Gender here is very important. I'm not saying anything on this. I leave it to your reflections, but there is a clear gender pattern. Women perform worse almost everywhere, even in financially sophisticated countries, or even in countries where there is a parity of opportunity as, let's say, a fact of life. Low education individuals, low income individuals, ethnic minorities typically, and also there are regional disparities, for example, in Italy between North and South, or in Germany between Western and Eastern Germany. And this is quite important because it creates a vicious circle, because controlling for income and other characteristics more illiterate people, low income, low education, save less, they participate less in financial markets, they invest less in fiscally advantaged products, being thus excluded from both market and state opportunities, the thing you were talking about before. Mind you, this is what I was telling before, we call associations. So we don't say that being a woman means that you are intrinsically less prone to financial concept. It means that in these countries, at this stage, we have found an association between a worse performance and being a woman. So causality is a different thing. And although in our research we try to, for each country, to make first an assessment part of financial literacy, and then we try to use financial literacy and to understand how this influenced participation in pension funds, we have a bit of evidence, but it's rather weak. So we don't really know how financial literacy influences behavior and choices effectively. Okay? So causality is hard to establish, also due to difficulties in finding proper instrument. And then there is a final piece of element which is important, and is given the fact that the pension provision, it changes everywhere, it's the importance of informing people. Okay? Here I have reported what is called a very important experiment of information, is the famous orange envelope that the Swedish government sends to citizens. They receive the letter, the orange envelope from the government. It says contribution credited, total value of savings, pension forecasts from age 65, incentive to postpone retirement. So quite a lot of information. And this is very important. And apparently, you know what the Swedish do when they receive? They are very confident on the letter. They are very happy that the letter is sent to them, but they take the letter and put in a drawer. So, I mean, it's an important piece of information, but they don't really use it. Maybe they like the bank account that most people receive and don't really go through. So my conclusion is that overcoming financial illiteracy is important. Different countries have started different programs. We cannot evaluate adequately this program because we don't have evaluation, we don't have assessment of the programs. The OECD is starting now to provide assessment of the various programs that have been initiated in different countries. It seems that policies are more effective if teachable moments are identified. Anyway, there is a long way to go, but since the title was rather grand, I looked for a let's say something also grand to finish. So here is George Bernard Shaw. You see things and you say, why? But I dream things that never were and say, why not? So if we think that financial literacy is something of a necessity for the population, for the wider population, then we should say, why not? And consider this an important objective for policy. Thanks.
I would like to ask you first, and then maybe if I may ask you one question as well. In European economies have high rate of unemployment, and it has been persistent for the last 20 years. Is it because of the accommodating and easy welfare programs that Europe has? Or is it because of other reasons?
Well, it's a very important but also a difficult question. Certainly, the labor market, the shape of the labor market was very unfavorable to a high level of employment. Rigidities were rather pervasive, okay? So a rigid market, to make you an example, is a market where it is practically impossible to fire people, okay? So you hire a person and then you have to take it. Because if you try to fire, then you have a judge sentencing that you are wrong and you have to take him, her back. So this makes the labor market quite rigid. The firm thinks twice or 3 times before hiring, and so it makes lower employment. But then the government, to overcome this is common throughout Southern Europe at least, in order to encourage employment, said, okay, let's try new ways, more flexible ways, and even less expensive ways. So this meant special jobs with lower payroll tax rates, okay? These jobs were destined to the young people, exactly because it was for them, and to women and young. The young people took these jobs, but in fact, this that was meant as a flexible component to the job market meant precariousness. So these are the precarious jobs that were offered, by which people, the young and women, have only offered, let's say, job occasions, and they are paying they or their employer are paying lower payroll taxes. So even if you look at the future, their future is not so guaranteed as the future of past generations. So because of all this, it has resulted, let's say, a dual market, labor market. The rigid one, where you have the protected segment of the labor market, and a growing precarious market, which is somehow reserved to the young and to women. This cannot continue, of course. Of course, it also has to do with welfare programs. Our welfare, but it's not only in Italy, it's also in Spain, it's also again in Southern Europe, was very much biased towards pension. But this is no surprise, because if you have a very rigid labor market, so that if you hire, you cannot fire, then you don't really need an employment benefit, because you don't have, by definition, an employed person. So you only have to provide a pension, by definition, because either you have out of labor force people, or you have employed, not unemployed as such. And our problem is that we have too many people out of the labor force, or too many people in the precarious segment. So you are absolutely right.
Thank you. Professor Kotlikov, I found your lecture very interesting, very nice. I have never heard about that senator that you've mentioned in the United States, that she's suggesting all these weirdo transactions. I've never heard about it. I don't know if somebody else has heard. And also what I wanted to ask...
She's fictional.
Sorry?
She's fictional.
Oh. Okay.
Okay.
I thought you... Okay. The other thing that I really want to ask you is that you mentioned this present value of the deficit, and you said that if you take the flows, future flows, when you have problems, or you get one result. And if you have present value, it's a different result. And I didn't quite understand it.
So if I use one set of labels, if I say you're giving the government, the Israeli government, some money this year,
Yeah.
let's suppose you're giving them 5,000 shekels. I could say that I could label that 5,000 as a tax payment. Or I could say what you're really doing is making a loan to the Israeli government, and then in 5 years, the government's going to pay you back with interest, and then it's going to hit you with a tax in 5 years equal to what it pays you back. So these are two sets of words that will lead to different reports of how much the government is actually taking in taxes this year. But in present value, your treatment is the same, because the present value of your lifetime tax payments ends up just to be 5,000. Suppose the policy is really to grab 5,000 and never to give you anything in the future on debt. Well, I can label that as taxes now and nothing in the future, or borrowing now and taxes in the future, such that they have the same present value. So what I call this stuff is not well defined. So therefore total taxes aren't well defined, therefore the deficit's not well defined. The present value of your lifetime treatment is well defined. So there are things that we can measure appropriately, but we're not measuring them. We're not talking about Greece in terms of their present value, their fiscal gap. We're talking about Greece in terms of their official debt. Well, their official debt is a matter of words. And this is an Alice in Wonderland situation here, which is we're taking these words as actually the policy. Whereas I can go back and historically and relabel all of Greek government transactions and say that they're actually running a huge surplus right now. And they've got an enormous stock of wealth, government wealth, bigger than even the Chinese government. And I can do it in 2 seconds. And we're missing, we're trapped in these words. And we're not missing the true fiscal policy. And in the US case, we're getting deeper and deeper problems. So that's the problem.
Thank you.